Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling something that I think a lot of us feel but maybe don't have the words for. We're going to be plunging into what our sources call empty existence. And there's a specific term that kept coming up in the literature, tontairong.
And that term is so important because it distinguishes this from, clinical depression or just feeling sad.
Right. This isn't about burnout, not really. It's about this chronic, kind of subtle state of detachment where you're going through the motions, you're living, but you don't actually feel alive.
That distinction is absolutely the key. What we're looking at is a prolonged state, a kind of existential void that just hums along quietly under the surface of a perfectly functional life.
So you're still doing everything.
You're doing everything, but the feeling of being is gone. And that's our mission today, really.
Yeah.
To unpack this modern condition, to look at its social roots, the psychological traps that keep people stuck in it, sometimes for years.
For decades, even.
For decades. And then most importantly, to talk about some concrete, practical steps you can take to reclaim that feeling of presence, to actually inhabit your own life again.
The way the sources describe this feeling is just, it's so powerful. It's not a big shock, not a tragedy that hits you all at once.
No.
It's that slow dawn. That moment you wake up and the first thing you feel is like reaching out your hand in a dark room and just touching cold, empty air.
And there's no sharp pain. There's no acute despair. And that's precisely why it's so insidious. It often goes completely undiagnosed, even by the person feeling it.
It's just a void where nothing really gets in, nothing touches you.
Right. And this leads to this core image that the research kept coming back to, the individual as a distant spectator.
A spectator of their own life.
Of their own life. Imagine you're sitting in the back of a movie theater, watching a film of your life, but the film is kind of blurry, and you don't feel like you belong in any of the scenes. You move, you go to work, you talk to people, you do all the things you're supposed to do, but you feel completely dislocated. You don't know why you're moving.
Just a shadow.
You're just a shadow passing through. And sometimes that shadow is so faint, the studies note, that the person literally forgets their own presence in a room.
That invisibility to yourself.
Yeah.
That has to be the core tragedy of it.
It is. Because the state is, it's light enough not to kill you. It doesn't show up as a 5-alarm fire.
But it's heavy enough to stop you from really living.
Exactly. It's not an attacker. It doesn't scream at you. It's more like a fog that just quietly settles over everything. It's not thick enough to be terrifying, but it's just persistent enough to completely obscure the path. So you keep walking, but you have no idea where you're going.
That silent erosion. That's what we're here to map out.
Oh.
We want to understand not just the philosophy behind tontairong, but the real world things that let it take root and how we can, find our way out of that fog.
How we can go from being a phantom in our own reality to being actually present and rooted in it.
Okay, so let's start with a really clear definition. What exactly is empty existence? The sources are clear. This isn't a mood. It's a state of being.
It's a prolonged state. And the defining feature is this neutrality. You're not in sharp pain, but you're definitely not happy. You haven't collapsed, but you don't feel like you're standing on solid ground either.
You're just drifting.
You're just drifting. It's like your life is on autopilot and you're moving purely because of inertia, because of the momentum of everything around you.
And that lack of feeling is the key.
It's the hallmark. The individual starts to separate from themselves, and the metaphor they use is powerful. It's like you're standing outside a house in the cold, looking through the window at a warm, bright room where other people are living.
You can see life, but you can't feel it.
You are right there. You can see it, you can hear it, you can almost touch it, but you are completely cut off from the current of life that's animating everything inside.
And that detachment, what does it do to you day to day?
Well, for one, time just loses its shape. Days blend into one another. You look back at the last month and it feels like a blur, like nothing really happened, no memories were made. And then when you try to connect, when you try to feel something or find some meaning, it's like your thoughts just fall into a black hole. There's no echo.
A soundless void.
Exactly. It's the tragedy of non-impact. And the most heartbreaking part of this is that the person often has no idea they're empty, because they're still performing perfectly.
They're high functioning.
Totally high functioning. They're laughing at work. They're posting happy photos on social media. They're keeping up the perfect appearance of someone who's thriving.
But then they're alone at night.
And that's when the mask comes off. When all the noise stops, they come into contact with this shapeless darkness inside. It's not painful, not joyful. It's just a long, deep quiet.
And that quiet doesn't destroy you.
No, it erodes you. Slowly. Unnoticed. It steals little pieces of you day by day.
There's an analogy in the sources that I think just perfectly captures this. The empty house.
The empty house.
Yeah.
Picture a beautiful modern home. Everything is perfect. The furniture is stylish. The lights are on. All the tech works.
Everything is in its place.
Precisely. The structure is flawless. But nobody lives there. There's no warmth, no mess, no laughter, no life. The emptiness doesn't destroy the house itself.
It just takes its soul.
It takes away the very reason for the house to exist. And that's the condition. The structure of your life, the job, the family, the social life, it's all perfectly intact. But the animating force, the why, is gone.
So how does it even start? How does the slide begin?
It starts so subtly. It begins the moment you lose that connection with your own life. You stop asking the big questions like, what do I actually want?
You stop talking to yourself.
You stop that internal dialogue. You basically outsource your own direction. You start walking a path that's been defined by society, by your job, by other people's expectations, not by your own 2 feet.
And you just forget how to live.
You forget how to connect with the messy, difficult, wonderful act of living. Everything just glides past, leaving no trace. So when we start digging into the roots of this void, the first thing to understand is that it's almost never a sudden crash.
Right, it's not one big event.
No, it's a process. The research calls it attrition. Think of it like a well that's draining drop by drop every single day for years. And while modern society didn't invent this feeling, it creates the absolute perfect conditions for it to grow.
A perfect storm of factors, so let's break them down. Root number 1 is the pace of industrial life.
The sheer speed of it. Everything is urgent, continuous, there are no pauses. Our minds are forced to run at a speed they were never designed for. We're constantly reacting, responding, producing.
Always on.
Always. And the void forms in those moments that we don't have, the moments to just stop and ask, why am I running so fast? Why am I living this way? It's the exhaustion of a machine that's been redlining for too long.
And that speed, that momentum, it feeds right into the next root, doesn't it? These external societal expectations.
Directly. There's this constant pressure to be busy, to achieve things people can see, to prove your value based on external metrics.
What you produce, how much you earn.
What other people think of you. And if you chase those external goals for too long, you lose touch with the internal question, what do I actually want? What gives me energy?
So your life becomes empty not because it's meaningless, but because it's not yours.
Precisely. You're living someone else's definition of a good life. It's a profound alienation from your own path.
And the vehicle for all this pressure is root number 3, digital distraction.
Our attention is just shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces by this constant stream of notifications, short videos, news feeds.
There's no space for deep thought.
There's no space. Reflection, contemplation, having an inner life that requires stillness, and that stillness has been systematically destroyed by the digital world. The void is almost inevitable when you lose the ability to just be alone with your own thoughts for 5 minutes.
Which makes the next root even more painful. Root 4.
Yeah.
The lack of authentic connection.
We have hundreds, maybe thousands of online friends, but very few people we can have a real, deep, vulnerable conversation with.
Interactions are shallow.
They're transactional, they're short. Society gives us the feeling of connection, but without any of the real substance. And the research is so clear on this. A soul that isn't truly seen, touched, witnessed in its messy reality, it just starts to fade.
The void is the state of an unseen soul. I like that.
It really is.
Then there's root 5, conformity. Just trying to fit in.
That constant, subtle self-adjustment, changing your diet, your career goals, your lifestyle, not based on your internal voice, but on what society says is good or successful.
And if you ignore that inner voice for long enough,
it just goes silent, it gives up, you lose your internal compass, and you start living by mimicry. You just follow the crowd because it feels safer, even if it's leading you off a cliff.
all of these things sound exhausting. Which brings us to root 6, cumulative mental fatigue.
And this isn't about one big trauma. This is the slow burn, the exhaustion from all the little chronic pressures work, bills, debt, comparison, relationships.
1,000 tiny cuts.
Exactly. They don't kill you, but they silently drain the energy you need to actually feel life, to feel curious or joyful. Empty existence is what happens when a soul is just tired for too long.
Okay, what about root 7, detachment from time?
This is when you're leaving too much in the past, in nostalgia, or too much in the future, in anxiety and planning. You lose your anchor in the present moment.
And if you're not in the present, you're nowhere.
You're literally nowhere. You become a tourist in your own life.
We're taught so many skills in school, but Root 8 points out what we're not taught.
Yeah.
Emotional literacy.
Yeah. We learn math and science, but nobody teaches us how to listen to our own soul, how to name our feelings, how to have a conversation with our own anxiety or emptiness.
We just avoid them.
We avoid them. And every time we run away from an emotion, the void gets a little bigger to hold that unaddressed feeling.
This sounds a lot like Root 9. The fear of existential meaninglessness.
It's the big one. This is Kierkegaard's idea. Anxiety isn't a sickness. It's the dizziness you feel when you realize you are totally free to choose your life's meaning. But that freedom is terrifying.
So we run from it.
We run from it by staying busy, by distracting ourselves, by doing anything to avoid that big, scary question, why am I here? And avoiding that question is what creates the void in the first place.
Then there's the reality of modern work. Root 10. The disconnect between work and meaning.
Spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week doing something that provides no sense of purpose, no sense of contribution. You do it for the money, for stability. But it doesn't feed your soul, it just consumes it.
And finally, Root 11, which is so paradoxical.
Yeah.
The shallowness of abundance.
Right. We have easy access to everything, quick entertainment, instant information, fast food. When everything is so easily obtained, nothing feels important. Nothing feels earned.
So life becomes a string of disposable moments.
Exactly. A life without an anchor. And the conclusion from all of this is so important. The void isn't a personal failure. It's not a sign of weakness.
It's a natural response.
It's a natural consequence of living in a world that doesn't give us the space to be human. It's the soul screaming, reminding us that we've been following the crowd for too long, and it's time to ask, where do I actually want to go? So we've talked about how the slide begins, but now we have to look at the really insidious part. How does this state become chronic? How do people get stuck here for years or even a lifetime?
Right. What keeps the void going? It's not the big storm anymore.
It's the silent nightly leaks. It's the subtle things that let the house of the self just rot from the inside out.
So mechanism number 1 is mental adaptation, the new normal.
This is just how the human brain works. It adapts to whatever lasts long enough. And that includes a lack of feeling.
So the emptiness becomes familiar.
It becomes familiar, and then it becomes normal. People stop feeling strong emotions, good or bad, and they just think, well, I guess this is just what being an adult is like. They stop seeing it as a problem to be solved.
That's dangerous. The abnormal becomes the baseline.
And once that happens, you lose the urgency to change anything. It's just your life.
Okay, mechanism 2 is something I think everyone will recognize. Substituting activity for meaning.
Oh, this is maybe the biggest one in our culture. An empty soul desperately wants to be filled, and modern society offers an infinite buffet of substitutes.
Busy work, endless entertainment, scrolling on your phone.
Exactly. These things act like a painkiller. They temporarily distract you, they cover up the void, but they don't heal it.
They make you think you're okay because you're busy.
I can't be empty, look at my calendar, look how much I got done today. But the emptiness is just growing silently underneath all that frantic activity.
And when you do feel that emptiness start to creep in, you use mechanism 3, rationalization. You make excuses.
You tell yourself, oh, I'm just tired, or I'm just stressed at work right now, or things will be better after this project is done.
It's a way to avoid the bigger truth.
It provides immediate comfort. It means you don't have to make a scary, fundamental change to your life. You just need a nap or a vacation. But the problem isn't fatigue, it's a deep loss of connection to yourself.
Okay, mechanism 4 is emotional dispersion. What's that?
It's a direct result of the information overload we talked about. The constant stream of stuff coming at you prevents any single emotion from being felt deeply.
So nothing sticks.
Nothing sticks. A moment of joy is immediately replaced by a worrying news headline. A pang of sadness is washed away by a funny video. A soul that can't feel deeply can't live deeply. It just sort of fades.
This connects to mechanism 5, right? Noise over connection.
Yes. You surround yourself with the noise of superficial relationships. You're always talking, but you're rarely speaking your truth. You're always listening, but you're rarely being truly heard.
It's the illusion of community.
The perfect illusion. You're in a crowd, so you can't be lonely, right? You are. You're profoundly lonely. And that unwitnessed soul just gradually disappears.
Then there's mechanism 6,
Right.
paralysis by choice.
The paradox of modern life. We have so many options for everything, what to watch, where to work, who to be, that we get overwhelmed.
And the fear of choosing wrong means you choose nothing.
You just stand still, you procrastinate, you stay in the same place, eroding your own life force through inaction, all while thinking you're about to make a move.
And that inaction leads to mechanism 7, self-detachment. The mask becomes the face.
You wear the social mask of the competent employee, the happy parent, the good friend for so long that you literally forget who you were underneath it.
You forget what you even like.
You forget what you dreamed of, what you believed in. Your true self just vanishes from your daily life, and the performance is all that's left. And the sources call that terrifying because you can lose yourself completely and no one on the outside would ever know.
Then there's mechanism 8, the avoidance of deep solitude.
We become terrified of silence because in the quiet, you start to hear the hard questions. Am I happy? Am I wasting my life?
So you turn on the TV, you put on a podcast.
You do anything to drown out that inner voice. And because that avoidance works instantly, it becomes a deeply ingrained habit that keeps the emptiness going.
Mechanism 9 is a really subtle one, self-punishment.
It's this quiet underlying belief that you're just not worthy of a big, meaningful, deeply felt life.
So you settle.
You settle for a smaller, fainter, muted life because you think that's all you deserve. It's not acute suffering, it's just a chronic state of living below your potential.
And finally, mechanism 10, assimilation to inertia.
This is just choosing the easy path, conforming to the superficial life society lays out, because trying to live a deep, authentic life feels too weird, too hard, too different.
You're afraid of standing out.
You're terrified, so you starve your own spirit just to fit in. And all of these things, they create this vicious cycle. The emptier you feel, the busier you get to forget it.
And the busier you get, the emptier you become.
Exactly. And the really sad reality is that a lot of people will live their entire lives in that in-between state. Neither happy nor sad. Just not really there, the unlived life. So now we have to pivot a little. We have to look beyond the psychology and the sociology of it all and get to the deeper philosophical core.
Okay.
The sources frame this void as more than just fatigue. At its deepest level, it is a signal. It's an existential warning flare from a soul that's been forgotten.
A signal we don't know how to read anymore. So it starts with this idea of alienation from existence.
Yes. This is the state where you are functionally detached from your own life. Your body is present, you're breathing, but you're not connected to the feeling of being alive.
You're just going through the motions.
They become meaningless motions. Walking, talking, even laughing. But some deep part of you is just stuck, immobile, unable to touch or be touched by anything. It's a profound estrangement from your own being.
And this ties back to existential philosophy, right? To thinkers like Sartre.
It does. Sartre had this idea that we are thrown into life. We don't ask to be here, we just are. And our task is to create our own meaning, our own essence.
But if we fail to do that,
if we fail to live authentically, if we just follow the script someone else wrote for us, we become strangers in our own lives. We are physically present, but we don't truly exist in a meaningful way. We're performing, not being.
And that feeling, that void,
Yeah.
it's not actually an emotion itself.
No, and this is a crucial point. It is the absence of emotion. It's a neutral space where everything just slides past without leaving a mark.
And the real fear isn't pain.
The real fear is feeling nothing at all. Not joy, not anger, not sadness, just fog. Because if the world doesn't affect you, if you can't feel it, you start to wonder, am I even really here?
This connects to Kierkegaard's idea, the vertigo of freedom.
Exactly. For Kierkegaard, freedom is terrifying. The realization that you and only you are responsible for creating your life's meaning is dizzying.
It's a huge burden.
A massive burden. And the fear of choosing the wrong path, of failing, is so great that many people just refuse to choose. They avoid it. They stand still.
And that avoidance is the void.
That avoidance of responsibility is the void. And when you're just standing still, your life degrades into what the sources call the inertia of duty.
Just a checklist of obligations.
A to-do list with no why behind it. You stop being a conscious agent and you just become a machine that functions. You keep going not because of passion or purpose, but because of sheer momentum.
This is where the social mask really becomes a problem. The social self versus the true self.
Yes, the tragedy of wearing that mask for so long that you forget you're wearing it. You mistake the mask for your actual face.
You live for the approval of others.
You live entirely by what is praised and accepted, and you abandon the messy, vulnerable true self. The void is the sound of that abandoned self crying out. It's a kind of spiritual death. You're alive, but your life isn't being lived by you.
This must be where we lose our ability to make meaning.
That's the core of it. Meaning isn't something you find, it's something you create by living for something bigger than your own comfort or fear. But the person in the void lives only by routine and safety. They can't create meaning because meaning requires risk.
And finally, it's sustained by this refusal of darkness.
You're constantly running from your own flaws, your own pain, the scary questions like, who am I really?
And every part of yourself you avoid.
Becomes a piece of the emptiness. A soul that refuses to face its own shadows can never be whole. And that signal, that emptiness, it's just asking one thing. It's an invitation to start living again.
Okay, let's bring this all back down to earth, back to what this actually feels like day in and day out. Because the void, it doesn't show up with a bang.
No, it's a whisper. It brings these small, daily distortions that just wear you down millimeter by millimeter until you look back and you don't recognize the person you've become.
And the first and biggest impact is this fading of color. The sources call it the color gray.
Yes. The void just systematically drains the vibrancy out of everything. Things that used to excite you or move you, a favorite song, a beautiful sunset, they become just distant echoes.
The music is just noise. The sunset is just the end of the day.
Exactly. The internal lens through which you see the world gets coated in this layer of dull gray. Everything is still there, it's just muted.
And that leads to this profound, causeless fatigue.
This is such a common symptom. It's not the tiredness you get from a hard day's work or a bad night's sleep. It's the weariness of a soul that isn't being recharged by meaning.
You wake up already tired.
You wake up tired, you go through your day tired, you come home tired. It feels like this invisible weight is dragging you down because all of your energy is going into just performing the act of living, with no spiritual fuel coming back in.
How does this affect relationships? The sources talk about passive relationships.
You start responding to people out of obligation, not desire. You listen without really hearing. You smile because you're supposed to smile, not because you feel joy.
You become a conversational mirror.
A perfect mirror. You just reflect back what's expected of you, and you start to distance yourself from the people you love, not because you don't care about them, but because you're not even close to your own truth. So how can you be close to anyone else?
And at work, it's the same thing. A detached work life.
You complete your tasks, you do your job, but there's no pride, no satisfaction, no sense of contributing to anything.
Work just becomes a way to mark time.
You're just counting down the hours until the weekend, hoping that's when you'll feel alive again. But the sources are so clear about this. The void doesn't take vacations. The emptiness follows you wherever you go because it's internal, not external.
And what about emotions? What happens to pain?
It becomes dulled pain. You might find it hard to cry or hard to laugh genuinely. And when emotions do come out, they're often confusing. You might snap with irritability for no reason.
The heart is locked.
It's locked.
Right.
And life without clear emotions is like trying to navigate without a map. Everything is just vague and confusing.
Then there's the modern evening ritual for so many people. The scrolling trap.
Ah, yes. You spend hours just endlessly scrolling. Not because it's fun, but because you don't know what else to do with the quiet.
Because silence means you have to face the void.
Exactly. So you fill that silence with content that never really touches you just to distract your brain.
Yeah.
And days, weeks, months just disappear into that digital haze with no real memories made.
This loss of self-belief also shows up as decision paralysis, right?
You lose the ability to make choices, not because you don't have enough information, but because every option seems equally meaningless.
So you freeze.
You freeze at the threshold of your own life, watching opportunities just drift by.
Which leads to a loss of inner resistance.
You just start going along with what everyone else wants because you don't feel strongly enough about anything to put up a fight. The void lowers your soul's immune system. You become agreeable because your own inner voice is just a whisper.
And all of this is driven by a deep fear of stillness.
A terror of it. Because in the quiet, you can hear that little voice saying, something is wrong here.
And you don't have the energy to deal with that.
You don't have the tools or the energy, so you keep the noise on. And the ultimate impact is that the empty person doesn't live badly, they just live faintly. Not strong enough to hurt, and bright enough to enjoy, they've just forgotten how to be vibrantly alive. So it is absolutely essential that we widen the lens now. We have to look at the societal context. The sources repeat this over and over. The void isn't just a series of personal failings.
Right. It's a product of this system.
It's a necessary product of the modern structure. When you build a society on speed, competition, and consumption, you are inevitably going to produce busy, rootless, empty people.
And it starts with the culture of busyness. Activity is everything.
Busyness is the primary metric of value. If your calendar is full, you are seen as important, successful. It doesn't matter if you're hollowed out inside.
So we choose to be busy to feel valuable.
We do. But busyness without meaning is just a more socially acceptable form of emptiness. It becomes the goal in and of itself.
We also have to deal with what the sources call the standardization of emotion.
This is huge. Society tells us what our emotions are supposed to look like. How to perform happiness on social media, how to hide sadness or vulnerability at work.
So there's no room for authentic, messy feelings.
None. And when you perform an emotion for long enough, like smiling through crushing anxiety, you lose touch with what you're actually feeling. You start to feel like a fraud in your own life.
The structure also creates these new forms of solitude.
Solitude in a crowd. We live packed together in cities, we work in open-plan offices, but we don't really touch each other's lives.
We talk a lot, but we don't hear each other.
Exactly. These shallow connections give us the illusion of belonging, but they don't actually nourish the soul. And a soul that isn't witnessed just shrinks.
Then there's the problem of information overload and shallow knowledge.
We are drowning in data, but we don't have the time or the quiet to digest it, to turn it into wisdom.
So we know a little about everything, but nothing deeply.
Right. And knowledge that doesn't get under the skin, that doesn't change you, is just noise. It leads to a fragile soul that's easily distracted.
We've touched on this, but let's zero in on detached labor.
So many modern jobs just fail to provide a sense of real contribution. You complete tasks, you hit targets, but you're so far removed from the end result that you can't see the meaning in your work.
The why is gone.
The why has been completely erased. You're just a cog in a machine, and your soul feels that hollowness.
And then we pour gasoline on this fire with comparison culture.
Driven by social media, where everyone is performing the highlight reel of their life, this constant exposure to other people's polished success just breeds this corrosive self-doubt.
It stops you from listening to yourself.
Completely. You stop celebrating your own small, quiet progress because you're too busy measuring yourself against someone else's curated fantasy.
All of this is underpinned by a culture of fear.
The fear of missing out, the fear of falling behind, the fear of not being enough. And that fear drives us to chase things we don't actually want.
We abandon what we need for what we're scared of losing.
We abandon rest and quiet and connection in a panic to keep up. And the void appears because our lives are full of the wrong things. Things we chose out of fear, not out of love.
Now, the sources are really clear on this point. This is a dialogue, not blame.
Yes, this isn't about blaming society. It's about understanding the mechanics of the system so we can learn how to resist it.
The structure is powerful, but not absolute.
Exactly. We can still find these internal paths, these small acts of resistance, turning off your phone an hour before bed, taking a walk without headphones. These are the spaces the structure can't reach.
And that's where our power lies, the internal locus of change.
We can't slow down the world, but we can slow down internally. We can't force the world to be authentic, but we can choose to be. We can't demand meaning from the world, but we can create our own. And that awareness is the first and most powerful step back.
Okay, so if the void develops through 1,000 tiny losses, the path back has to be built on 1,000 tiny gains.
So no dramatic overnight transformations. No, those rarely stick. This is about small, rooted, persistent steps. It's about the slow, intentional return of the soul to the present moment.
Strategy number 1 is maybe the most radical of all, allowing yourself to stop.
In a world that demands constant motion, stopping is a brave act. We're not talking about quitting your job. We're talking about stopping internally.
So what does that look like in practice?
It can be a 10-second pause before you pick up your phone in the morning, a single, slow, conscious breath while you're waiting for the elevator, just creating these tiny micro pauses to listen to what's going on inside. Your soul has been waiting for you to do that.
I love that. Okay, strategy 2, re-engaging with reality. The small truths.
This is about getting out of your head and back into your body, back into the physical world. The void thrives on us only touching abstract information on screens.
So it's about paying attention to the senses.
Yes. Consciously feel the warmth of the coffee cup in your hands. Notice the feeling of the wind on your face. Actually taste your food. These small sensory details are anchors. They pull you back down to earth.
Strategy 3 is about creating mental space, or unfilled time.
And this is different from just free time. This is time that you intentionally leave empty. No noise, no consumption, no tasks.
A walk without a podcast, a meal without the TV on.
Exactly. These empty spaces are crucial. They open up a little door for your soul to finally speak. If you fill every single second, your mind never has a chance to process anything.
Strategy 4 is a big one. Redefining internal importance.
This means asking that simple, terrifying question: What is actually important to me? Not to society, not to your parents, not to your boss, to you.
And then focusing on whatever that is, no matter how small.
Even if it's just a tiny flicker of curiosity or interest, life starts to return the moment you dare to prioritize what is genuinely important to your own self.
Strategy 5 is intentional simplification.
This isn't about trendy minimalism. This is about existential decluttering.
So, pruning your life.
Intentionally shedding the things that drain you, the superfluous commitments, the relationships that are all obligation, the unconscious habits. Everything you let go of creates more room for your true self to breathe.
Strategy 6 feels a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Allowing small pain.
It is. We spend so much energy running from any hint of discomfort. But escaping the void means you have to be willing to feel again, and that includes the difficult stuff.
So letting yourself be a little sad.
Letting yourself be tired or nostalgic or disappointed without immediately trying to fix it or distract yourself. When you allow all emotions to exist, your soul comes back to life.
Strategy 7 is about restoring a sense of agency through small, constructive actions.
This is so powerful. Tidy one corner of your desk, write one honest sentence in a journal, read 3 pages of a book, walk for 5 minutes.
Why do these tiny things matter so much?
Because building or creating anything, no matter how small, reminds your soul that it can shape its world. It reminds you that you are not helpless, and that feeling of agency is the strongest antidote to the void there is.
Strategy 8 brings in some Stoic wisdom. The internal locus of control.
This is about clearly separating what you can control from what you can't. You can't control what other people think of you, or the economy, or societal expectations.
But you can control your own thoughts and actions.
You can control your responses, your choices, your behavior, and when you stop wasting energy on the external and focus on the internal, you reclaim your power.
And finally, the master key, strategy 9, practicing presence.
This is it. This is the whole game. Being fully where you are. When you're eating, just eat. When you're walking, just walk. When you're listening to someone, actually listen. Don't just wait for your turn to talk.
Because an empty person is never really present.
Never. They're always just passing through the moment on their way to the next one. But a person who is fully anchored in the now cannot be empty, because life only happens in the now.
And the goal here, the promised land, it's not some big flashy achievement.
Not at all. The goal is the genuine feeling of living. Waking up without that soul-deep fatigue, having a quiet evening without needing to fill it with noise, a conversation where you feel truly seen.
It's that moment you ask yourself why you're living.
And for the first time in a long time, there's a small, quiet answer that is completely, authentically your own. The goal isn't perfection, it's just presence. It's being rooted and knowing that your own internal light is on.
Hashtag outro.
So we've walked through the cold anatomy of that empty room. We've understood the slow, systemic erosion that gets us there. And we've mapped out the subtle traps that keep us stuck. And the path back isn't a single leap. It's a slow, quiet, intentional return to the present moment. One small, rooted step at a time.
In this deep dive, it's really meant as an invitation for self-reflection. It's never about judgment. It's just a reminder that we all have this capacity for a deep, authentic life.
But it's capacity we have to actively cultivate.
We have to cultivate it in resistance to a world that wants us to be fast, distracted, and superficial. The ultimate takeaway here seems to be about agency. That every single day, we have the power to shift from that default setting of just being a shadow to being a conscious, active presence in our own lives.
And so the existential question that we hope every listener carries forward from this is simple, but it is immense. And it's a question you have to ask yourself today. Are you truly living, or are you just passing through your own life like a shadow? We look forward to your journey back to the light.